Peptides are one of my personal favorite skincare categories to explore. Just the idea that these little fragments are getting into the skin and exerting a benefit is pretty cool. There's just tons of promise, and I think the mechanistic action of them is super interesting considering there are so many different peptides around. This video will focus a little bit more on the anti-aging serums that I've been using for the last year or so, but I might have to tackle in a different video the different types of peptides that do different things. Also, I'm testing a new mineral sunscreen and I can see in the camera that my skin is super shiny. I think it's picking up more white cast. So obviously it's a bit of a flop, so you'll have to excuse me for looking a bit more oily than normal. I've been using peptides for years and years, at least 10, could be 15 years, for truly a long time. So as I talk through these products, I can't really sit here and tell you which is best, because honestly, a lot of the products that I'm talking about today are newer to my routine. So everything that's going on with my skin is an accumulation of lots of different products throughout the years. But peptides themselves as a category has been a consistent through line. What I really like about the more recent crop of peptide products is that brands seem to really be focusing on delivery systems and how best to stabilize them. And so I think a lot of the newer peptide products that we're seeing are actually a lot better than what we used to have. And just the concept that some brands are taking where it's a combination of lots of different things just adds a lot of value to the product and streamlines the skincare routine. Many of the ingredients that I'll talk about today fall under the category of biomimetic peptide. And put simply, something that is biomimetic has been designed to mimic the function or behavior of a naturally occurring molecule. But with that said, it may not be like an exact structural copy of an entire sequence. Often biomimetic peptides and ingredients have shorter sequences or fragments, and sometimes even modified structures to improve the stability and delivery into the skin. This also means that some of these biomimetic ingredients, or maybe even most of them, they may only partially retain a specific effect. Now, I'm not a scientist by any means, so this is quite baseline stuff, but from what I understand, full proteins have a specific sequence that's quite long and very large, and also a certain folded structure that is influenced by lots of different things happening in the skin. But you generally can't apply these full proteins just topically because they're too large to get anywhere. So that's why peptide fragments have been developed, which is what we often see in skincare, and they typically have a more targeted approach, but also then maybe only partial activity. This also means that increasingly a lot of ingredient suppliers, they're linking particular peptide fragments to carriers as well, and that just helps get these peptides into the skin more effectively. Because some of these carriers are more precise, generally it allows for a lower dose. And it also reduces the chance of the peptide just falling out of the formula and not working at all. Peptides, like many other skincare ingredients, are susceptible to formula challenges. And this is often surrounding something called precipitation or aggregation. So essentially, if an ingredient is not stabilized well enough in a formula, sometimes we don't know if it has sort of like dropped out or fallen out or sort of clumped together. So that unfortunately can result in less activity. So this is quite a long introduction, but I just wanted to set the stage of peptide technology. And again, I've just gone over that very briefly. There's so much to talk about in this topic that an actual relevant scientist with expertise would be able to explain much more, accurately. But I just wanted to mention it because one of the downsides of being a skincare consumer is that we don't have a lot of insight into actual formula quality. So knowing how well something has been designed to actually exert a benefit is really challenging. And this is often called label claim, where there's the bare minimum effort. And unfortunately, brands can get away with marketing things without really demonstrating proper efficacy, while there are other brands that are a little bit more science-minded and actually care if their product does something. So they're out here trying to really maximize ingredient technology and properly design a formula with integrity. But knowing who does things well and knowing who is cutting corners is really hard, and it's probably likely that some of the products that I discussed today, maybe there are issues with the formulas that I haven't been able to see. So as always, if you have any additional insights to give, please do share in the comments, because we are all here to learn, and ultimately we're all trying to find products that are worthwhile. And all of this is a roundabout way of explaining that if you happen to have used a peptide product and you feel let down by the results, that doesn't necessarily mean that the peptides you are using are faulty or don't work. It could be that they just weren't designed well enough in a product. So it might be a case of, unfortunately, trial and error and having to try a few different peptide products until you land on one where you feel like it is actually exerting a skin benefit. Part of the issue of the skincare community is that we often judge things on ingredients, but really the conversation is strictly around formula. It's just that's a much harder conversation to have because that takes such a long time to figure out. And the other thing is it does take many, many months for peptides to start working. So, some people might see a subtle benefit in a couple months, but for some people it can take 6 to 12 months before you're really starting to see anything happen. And so all of these things together does make it challenging to be a skincare consumer because you're sort of having to put faith in products that we don't always know are working. And so it can feel like this journey of just wasting time and money constantly. And unfortunately for that, I don't have any direct answers for you. I can't tell you the best product. This list that I'll go through shortly is just going to highlight some of the reasons why I've enjoyed using it. But everything in skincare is always personal experience, and whatever sounds nice to you, you might just have to try and see how you go. So that's the end of sort of my science-leaning spiel. The rest of this video will be a little bit more lighthearted and just about the products themselves and some of the label claims, ingredients, textures, and that sort of thing. So let me finally get into the list of peptide products that I think are worth your attention. And as I said at the start, these do focus more on anti-aging. So we are looking at more at like longevity, lines and wrinkles, that sort of thing, collagen, elastin. The first product I'll mention is the Medik8 Liquid Peptides Advanced MP. And this is actually the product that sent me down like a whole rabbit hole of the folded structure principle. I'd heard of folded structures in passing, but I'd never really seen a brand talk about it within the context of their key ingredient. So that piqued my interest, and it makes a lot of sense as to why some of these newer technologies we're starting to see might have better efficacy in the skin. This is an extremely comprehensive peptide serum. They've added their new ingredients in the form of mini proteins. One is an expression line mini protein for lines and wrinkles, and the other is a growth factor mini protein, really looking to address sort of structural skin components. These are quite an interesting technology. I think they really only came to market maybe in 2024, thereabouts, so it seems to be relatively new, or at least the main articles that I can find about it are from 2024. So the great thing is that Medik8 were truly able to jump on this super quickly. One of the benefits of being a more agile, sort of smaller brand is that they can see things that are emerging and create from that, whereas a lot of the heritage, more corporation-led brands are really slow. But I think even the heritage brands are starting to notice that they need to be a little bit quicker. I have mentioned the concept of folded structure a couple times throughout this video, and that having a 3D folded structure is one of the key benefits of mini proteins. This is thought to make a mini protein more stable, but still small enough to penetrate the skin. And the actual 3D folded structure is supposed to have a better affinity with natural skin receptors. So it's like your skin is able to recognize them more effectively. Honestly, I think Medik8 probably could have created an entire serum out of just the mini proteins, as they're quite a cool skincare invention. But one of the really nice things about this serum is that they didn't stop there, and they actually also included a bunch of other industry-leading peptides. This includes things like Matrixyl 3000, which I would say is probably the most well-known anti-aging peptide on the market, and also encapsulated copper peptides. Medik8 doesn't specifically mention other trade name ingredients, but it looks like they're also using Lufazole and Matrixyl Synthesis, which came a little bit after Matrixyl 3000, plus a bunch of others that I won't get into because there's so many. I think they say there's like a 30% concentration of these peptide complexes. So they've absolutely packed this serum with an abundance of peptide technologies, both more classic and also newer, which I think is just a really cool product design. And to see this all in one serum, which really isn't that typical, also makes this a little bit extra value. Texturally, this is a milky serum, and it has a slightly gelled or silky component to it, but I didn't find that it weighed my skin down at all, and it was super easy to layer, although I did prefer using it as the last serum step before moisturizer. So if you're a layerer, then I'd still put lighter weight products under it. It melts onto the skin with a lot of glide, and I would describe it as having an almost second skin effect with a almost primer-like quality. So with that said, although this is a super lightweight texture, it's not super weightless because of that second skin feel. So if you're extremely sensitive to like the sensation of a film on your skin, then you may not enjoy this texture as much. But this ingredient list is really hard to beat, and I do think that Medik8 are one of the brands that actually care about product development. Next up is the Naturium Multi-Peptide Advanced Serum, which I think I've used at least 4 bottles. Absolutely love this product, and the value is so good. And the texture of this is also milkier, but I find it to be especially smoothing. I've included this one second on the list because it probably most closely resembles Medik8, and I actually have historically used the Naturium alongside the Medik8, so maybe one morning, one evening, or one on one day, one on the other day, just to stretch out product, because the Medik8 is a little bit pricier. I would say the Medik8 texture is maybe a little bit lighter and more satin leaning, while Naturium to me feels a touch more nourishing and a bit creamier, and maybe there's a bit more of an obvious dewiness from it, but it's still very light. Naturium's peptide serum is definitely more simple, but of course a lot less expensive as well, so that's always the trade-off, right? But I actually think it still does a great job of highlighting the key peptides they've chosen to include. Naturium specifically uses Argireline amplified, which is still one of the gold standard peptides for lines and wrinkles. Although I'm pretty sure Medik8 uses Argireline as well, I'm unclear if they're using Argireline amplified or the older version of it, whereas we know that Naturium is specifically using the upgraded amplified version. And this new version of Argireline is just supposed to have a better affinity with the skin and enhanced efficacy, so it's supposed to lead to just quicker and better results. And like the Medik8, Naturium has also added encapsulated copper peptides. But I would say one of the main selling points, or one of my favorite features of the Naturium serum, is that they've done a good job of crossing the peptide concept, but also have made it an antioxidant serum. So they've included encapsulated ferulic acid. So together these things make a lot of sense to use in the daytime under sunscreen. So you're getting this like environmental protection as well as anti-aging peptide technology in a really nice moisturizing base for a really good price point. Another serum that is in a similar pocket to these two is the Geek Gorgeous Power Peptides. Now, sorry, I've emptied my Medik8 Naturium serums, though I don't have new bottles open. This is what the Geek Gorgeous looks like, so it's in a classic dropper bottle. I would say the Geek Gorgeous product is a little bit closer to the Medik8 peptide blend. Just this Geek Gorgeous one doesn't use Argireline, and they instead focus on Matrixyl 3000 and Matrixyl Synthesis. Plus it still has the encapsulated copper peptides and also tetrapeptide 21. Like both Naturium and Medik8, the Geek Gorgeous serum also has a milkier texture. This one is a little bit more fluid and a typical sort of serum feeling. To me, it's the lightest and most invisible of the three products that I've spoken about so far, and also the most affordable. I think maybe Geek Gorgeous targets Europe, UK a little bit more specifically, so I don't know how easy it is to find in the US or Australia and other parts of the world, but I'll link them below just if you want to check them out, especially if you're on the hunt for a good, solid, budget peptide serum. I really like all three of these serums, but I think I'd probably personally lean towards the Medik8 or the Naturium. Those textures just end up having a little bit more of a unique skin feel, and I really like how it sits under sunscreen, so more so texturally. But I think in terms of the actual peptide blend, then you can pick any of them and just sort of see where you land. In many ways, I think Geek Gorgeous sort of sits in the pocket of something like The Ordinary, where they're probably assuming that people are layering serums, whereas both the Medik8 and the Naturium are maybe a touch more comprehensive in terms of being standalone products. Now, I just wanted to quickly step away from dedicated peptide serums, because peptides also do appear in other serums that maybe don't tout them as much. And there are two products that I use very regularly in my routine that I just thought I'd mention, because if you're not in the market for a dedicated product, you might be looking at one of these other serums just a way of sneaking in peptides anyway. First is Dieux Deliverance, which is probably my favorite niacinamide focused serum that I've ever used. I really love this product. And if you've watched my channel or followed me on Instagram for a while, you know that I've been talking about Deliverance for years at this point. It does focus on niacinamide and a couple of soothing extracts, and the soothing side is the key reason why I enjoy Deliverance. But it also has an extremely invisible texture, so I can throw it on at layers with anything and it just like works back so easily. But one of the signature ingredients in here is actually Matrixyl morphomics, which is one of the newer peptides that still is part of the Matrixyl family, but we don't see it nearly as often as Matrixyl 3000 or even Matrixyl Synthesis. From what I understand of Matrixyl morphomics, it's supposed to act on more complex wrinkles, so think like frown lines and vertical lines. So I really like that Dieux have actually used this newer version of the Matrixyl peptides, simply because it doesn't appear as often in other products, so it means that I'm not overlapping very much. In the 3 other peptide serums that I've mentioned, they don't have Matrixyl morphomics in there. So that way I can easily integrate a dedicated peptide serum and still have Deliverance in the background, and they really complement each other. And I feel like I'm getting full scope of the entire Matrixyl family, which is something that I've always been interested in integrating into my routine. Next is the Sachi Pro Resilience Serum, which has actually been renamed to the Peptide Pro Resilience Serum Concentrate, because I think they realized that people will probably like the idea of seeing peptides in general serums as well. This is more heavily focused on like barrier repair and skin soothing ingredients. It has bioflavonoids and antioxidants and a bunch of hydrators. To me, the texture is much more like watery fluid and a little bit slippy, so I actually often use it in my essence step and then would still layer one of these other serums that I've spoken about on top. So I would absolutely suggest exploring Sachi Pro Resilience if you know that your skin is super easily sensitized, or if you're constantly dealing with reactive skin. In many ways, I consider Sachi Pro Resilience to be similar to Lancome Genifique, or even potentially the Neod modulating glucosides, but with added peptides. So yeah, this isn't as focused on peptide technology. I think it just has one key complex in there to help with anti-aging, lines and wrinkles, but worth considering if you are sensitive skin focused and you just want to simplify the options in your routine while still having some level of peptide activity. Heading back to a dedicated peptide serum, and that's Freeze Frame from Educated Mess. This is really cool because it's using an entirely different peptide scope and like focus on delivery systems that the other products aren't using. One in particular actually uses diamond powder to stabilize and deliver peptide into the skin, and I'm pretty sure it's the original Matrixyl peptide we're talking about here. The texture is far more gelled, so this one is not milky, and I will describe it as a hydrogel. It feels silky but elastic and quite bouncy and super smooth, and it actually has a cooling sensation from an included menthol derivative. I'm pretty sure Educated Mess say that the menthol derivative they're using in here isn't supposed to irritate the skin at all, so it's just there for a bit of a refreshing feeling. And the kind of sensation that you get from that menthol-like activity kind of matches the texture, because it is very much a gel. Alex, who formulates for Educated Mess, is very well known on social media herself, and she is truly such a great person. And one of the things I know about her, which she talks about often in her content, is about stability and delivery systems. So really everything that we're looking at here has been designed with some sort of encapsulation or conjugation to ensure that the product is lasting as long as possible, while also being able to penetrate the skin more effectively. I guess there's not much else that I can say with this particular product, as I've only been using this one for a few weeks now. But as I said, the key here is very much in delivery systems. So if you feel like you've used every peptide product on the market, maybe trying something like Freeze Frame, which is so focused on ensuring those peptides are getting to where they need to go, could be worth trying. I'll finish off this video going back to a more comprehensive serum that could really be considered a one and done product in any skincare routine, and that's from Sweet Chemistry, specifically their barrier repairing Hydra-Serum. This kind of has everything going for it, so it's almost like combining antioxidants, a nourishing serum, moisturizing, hydrating ingredients, ceramides, skin soothing, if I didn't say that already, hyperpigmentation benefits. So there's just a lot going on here. The texture to me is also the most nourishing, and I will describe it as like a rich gel cream emulsion. It's just like a little lighter feeling than a moisturizer, but once it's absorbed, it actually still manages to feel quite light, so I never feel like it's weighing my skin down. Sweet Chemistry have taken a similar approach to Medik8, where in addition to their flagship ingredient, they've still loaded the product with a bunch of industry-leading peptides. Only, as I suggested before, they've packed this further with other ingredients that lots of skin enthusiasts would love to see. So I'll throw up the list on screen instead of running through them, otherwise I'd be here for an hour. Where Medik8 went down the road of introducing MiniProteins to market, Sweet Chemistry have taken a slightly different approach and are using their own signature ingredient based on extracellular matrix-derived peptides. They call them Matrikynes with a Y. And this is actually similar to what made the Matrixyl family of synthetic peptides so popular, but Sweet Chemistry are kind of going more of like a naturally derived version of that. Except, Matrixyl as a focus, and all of the Matrixyl peptides are kind of like a fragment. Sweet Chemistry works with Xylix Bio, who has developed their own entirely new ingredient, and they were actually granted their own inky name. Essentially, this is a proprietary mixture of Matrikyne peptides derived from upcycled bovine bone from discarded food industry waste. I read somewhere that this material is developed using enzymatic hydrolysis, where it creates this sort of mixture or soup of peptide fragments mixed with other fragments of the extracellular matrix. But I've lost the source of what the exact mixture is, and because it's proprietary, I don't know that we'd be able to find much detail on it. But importantly, the brand does claim that the resulting mixture is sort of small enough to be able to penetrate the skin, and therefore more likely to exert as topical skincare benefit. The scope then of the ingredient that Sweet Chemistry is using, because it's like a blend of lots of different things, potentially hundreds of different fragments, means that maybe conceptually the action on the skin is more broad and potentially is then able to signal many different repair pathways. So it's maybe not just targeting lines and wrinkles, but also able to work on hyperpigmentation, redness, inflammation, as well as just general hydration levels, skin quality, tone, and density. So nearly all of the other peptides that I've spoken about today have a very specific, precise focus, whereas the blend of Sweet Chemistry is really targeting and designed around overall skin rejuvenation. But because the soup that Sweet Chemistry uses is so broad, I'm unclear if applying something like this actually leads to more questionable activity because the precision isn't there as much. So I'm not sure if it means that the resulting ingredient is more inconsistent, or if the sourcing of the ingredient leads to different composition each time they do it. So it's like, how can you truly measure the potency or efficacy of something if it's changing because it's coming from a natural source? So potentially there's a lot more variability involved, but this is something that's way beyond my scope of understanding. So I can't sit here and tell you if these concerns are valid. It's just something that I'm thinking about while using this product. The more well-known peptides or synthetic peptides like Matrixyl and all the others we've spoken about like Argireline as well, they are more precisely and intentionally extracted to mimic a particular action in the skin. So each time you use it, it's the exact same thing over and over again. This makes the action of a peptide like that probably more precise, and maybe even allows for more a cost-effective process, which is why these peptides can appear in products that don't cost as much. And of course, there's the whole conversation around industry scale versus small batch extraction. Now, having said all that, the good news about Sweet Chemistry is that they're actually working with Xylix Bio for the ingredient, and they are a regenerative medicine company, so it's not like some random cosmetic ingredient supplier. So it seems like there wouldn't be a better place to source an ingredient like this, and I'm sure the purity and consistency of the resulting soup is going to be as good as it can be. But as I said earlier, because a lot of this stuff is proprietary, I'm not sure that we're really able to get clear answers. One day I'll need to make a dedicated video on Sweet Chemistry because I have thoroughly been enjoying their products. And maybe I'll need to ask the brand if they're willing to discuss some of these things that I've spoken about. Because actually the brand owner is super open and loves to talk about Sweet Chemistry. And ultimately, as I discussed at the very start of this, because Sweet Chemistry, including tons of other industry-leading peptides on top of all the other barrier support, hydrators and antioxidants, it's not like you're just paying for their Matrikyne technology. That's almost a bonus. What I can say with certainty is that I have absolutely loved using Sweet Chemistry products. My skin takes to them really well, and I do feel like my skin is always just more even and comfortable when I use them. I haven't been using the Hydra-Serum in a little while, and I've started to up my retinoid use, so my skin is freaking out a little bit more lately. So actually, I started integrating this again last night, and I'm going to just use this for the next little while to see how my skin reacts. So my favorite thing about the serum is that it seems to be able to deal with sensitivity really quickly. And because I'm now returning it back to my focus product, I'll be able to update you relatively soon if I think that it actually helps with how my skin is reacting lately. So I'll try and include it in an upcoming empties video soon, or even in just the general Sweet Chemistry vid if I end up filming that at some point. This video is now starting to get a little bit too long, so I'm going to stop it there. I hope I've covered all of the peptide highlights and answered a few of the questions that you might have, and that I was able to describe things relatively accurately. As is always the case, I'm sure that I've forgotten to include something super obvious, and you might have noticed that I didn't really talk about growth factors too much. I would say that general peptides are a little bit more interesting to me than growth factors. Please do let me know if you have any questions in the comments, or if you have any general feedback to give, especially if you've tried a a peptide product that you absolutely love. Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Again, sorry about my zinc face today, and I'll see you in the next video.